Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the briefing room. My name is Eric Cavanaugh and I will be your moderator for today's event in which we're going to just explore and discuss this whole concept of self-service business intelligence and how it can foster collaboration. So obviously there is some tight collaboration that needs to take place in order to enable self-service, and one of the big issues, of course, is how do you define the guardrails to keep people from doing things they shouldn't be doing, or to keep people in such a position that what they're looking at is an accurate view of what's happening out there in the real world. So here's a slide about yours truly and enough about me. The mission, as many of you know out there of the briefing room, is to really get down to brass tacks and understand what is going on out there in the field of information management. We have quite a few of you online with us today, and of course we had quite a few yesterday as well, so thank you so much for those of you who attended yesterday's event. That was a new series in which we're talking to senior business executives about how they manage their BI teams, so a slightly different conversation than we'll have today. Of course, here in the briefing room, we really want to understand how these technologies work. So we get technical briefings from vendors. Sometimes we see demos. We're going to see a demo today from Tableau Software, and they'll talk about how data visualization can be used to glean insights, but also how people can collaborate using these visualizations. So it should be a pretty interesting discussion. So as many of you know, we cover a different topic each month in the briefing room. June is intelligence, July is disruption. You can see the rest of them there. December is innovators, so that's sort of a catch-all category. And we do this because we want you to have a good apples-to-apples comparison of what is going on out there in particular domains of technology. Because obviously if you're going to be buying an enterprise software package, they're usually not inexpensive, and you want to make sure that what you're getting is what you think you're getting. So BI, business intelligence, it's funny how it seems to be taking a back seat, at least in the hype cycle, to big data and analytics and so forth. But of course, analytics can comprise a whole variety of different things. You can have process analytics, business analytics that can deal with just about any kind of data out there. And of course, you can have traditional business intelligence, which can be used to figure out how profitable you are, why certain products are doing well, why certain products are not doing well, all kinds of different things. So we're pleased to have Analyst Wayne Eckerson online today. He has been around for many years, has been focused very tightly on this industry, excuse me, for probably, 20 years or so. You can see since
right.
1995, yeah. So it's kind of a long time, and he's got a lot of perspective for how all this stuff works. We're also going to hear from Tableau Software. I've been following them since 2005 when they unveiled some of their technology at a TDWI conference in San Diego. And I remember back then being very impressed with how easily you could mix and match data sets. It had a drag and drop type interface, which of course is very user-friendly. A lot of people don't like to hack out code, especially business people. They want to work more with visualizations, with images, and use those data sets to kind of understand where the outliers are, what is different about what's going on in the world of your business right now, and that's where data visualization can really be helpful. And of course, one of the biggest trends we're seeing in the last year or two revolves around collaboration. So you see it everywhere. Look at Google Docs, for example, and how much Google Docs fosters and enhances collaboration. You can work on the same document right at the same time, 5, 6, 7 different people commenting on things, putting little messages here and there. It really changes the way in which work can get done. So we're going to learn today about how data visualization and those processes can help foster collaboration. So with that, I'm going to hand the keys to the WebEx over to Ellie Fields, and the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Eric. And this is Ellie Fields. I'm talking about fostering collaboration today with self-service BI, and it's a subject near and dear to our hearts because collaboration really implies that everybody is pulling on the oar in some way and contributing, and you need an element of self-service to make that happen. So let me make sure I can advance. The interesting thing about analytics today in the enterprise is that both business and IT want the same thing. Everybody wants to be able to use the data that they're collecting. Almost every organization is collecting a lot of data today, in some cases, as Eric said, big data, And everyone wants to be smarter. Everybody wants to put that to use. But it's simply too hard and too complex. And that's one of the barriers to collaboration, to actually even doing the analytics. And sometimes it's just a matter of putting the wrong things in the wrong camp. What we think is really important to collaboration is a rapid cycle and a self-service cycle. So as I mentioned, if you've got IT doing all of the work in terms of, hey, I've got to build every single dashboard, I've got to make every single change to every dashboard, and the business users are sitting there just consuming, that's not really collaboration, and that's not going to foster a cycle of exploration and understanding and really taking you to the next level with your analytics. The business users need to be able to contribute to this in some way, and we find that IT really wants that as well, because IT is good at a certain set of things like managing security and managing data governance, and the business users are really good at asking their questions and understanding when they've answered those questions. That's something IT is not as good at. Another reality, before I jump into the demo, which I'll get to in a few minutes, another reality that organizations have to contend with is that there really is all kinds of data in an organization today. The organization does not exist that has only homogeneous data. All its data in one place in a very neat data warehouse with no changes and no schema updates. That organization doesn't exist, or it's about to go out of business. And so we really look at fostering collaboration across all different kinds of data. It doesn't matter what the data is. You've got people who have certain IT tasks to do. You have people who want to answer business questions, and they need to work together. And it really doesn't matter if that's on Hadoop or on a cube or on an Excel spreadsheet. And another sticking point that's often come up in analytics, and especially when you talk about the IT and the business working together, is whether or not you're going to do your analytics in memory, so on the local machine of the business user, or live. And there are pros and cons to both. From IT's perspective, in memory can just create another data silo. It can be a problem. Maybe they've invested in a big data warehouse or an optimized analytics environment like Vertica, and they don't want users taking that data offline in memory. They're worried about security with that. They're worried about a lot of different things. And they want customers to be able to connect live. Now, there may be other situations where IT's got a transactional database and they want to provide that for analytics. They maybe don't have time to create a cube or a warehouse on it, but they don't want users hitting that directly because it's going to slow it down. And in that case, in-memory may be a really good solution. And then from the user's perspective, in-memory can help them a lot speed up an analysis. So if they're working with a large data set or a slow data set. And so the position that we take, and I think is really got to, if you're going to foster collaboration, you've got to let the organization make this choice. You've got to have a tool that lets you choose whichever one you want. In some cases, it might be appropriate to use in-memory for your analysis. In some cases, live might be the most appropriate thing. And another problem that IT and business are always struggling with is this idea of data silos. You have your finance data in one place, your sales data in another place. Business users want to go across those silos, but IT doesn't want to be burdened with creating mashups of those or creating new data warehouses for every single analysis. And so you've got to take an approach that lets business users get at the different data they need from the different silos and create a comprehensive 360-degree analysis without putting a huge burden on IT. And so how do you do that? That's a big problem that we see from people working with data and business intelligence today. And the last thing you need to do, and this is a diagram actually of Tableau here, is you need to be able to have data published in seconds. If you're going to collaborate on data, you need to be able to put a dashboard out and let other people come and access it, or else you're never going to be able to use that data as a really collaborative object, as an object of discussion. And so the way that we do it at Tableau is we take an author once approach. So somebody authors a dashboard, and that gets pushed out to an iPad, to mobile Safari, to a PC browser, and in beta we have Android tablets as well. So no matter how people are consuming that information, whether they're on the road or in the office, as long as they've got credentials to the data, to see the data, they can go and get that information. And I'll talk a little bit more about authoring when we go into the demo. This is a quick slide of some of the customers that Tableau has, and a lot of these customers are using us for this kind of ad hoc analytics, self-service BI, and collaborating with business and IT. And I wanted to bring up just one quick customer case at AAA Allied Group. It's funny, a lot of times people think business is the group pushing self-service, and in many cases it is, but in this case, and in a lot of cases, it's IT pushing self-service, because IT does have a set of things that they're responsible for, and iterating on the next version of a report is usually not one of them. They're not as good at it as the business user in many cases, because they don't know what the business user is trying to do, and they don't have the time to do it. They don't have the resources to do it. What IT should be doing is making sure that the business user is working in an environment of good data, of strong security, and is able to take the results that they generate and share that with others across the organization. That's the role of IT, and that's what they want to be doing. So you can see a quote here. People were collaborating more often because they had the information at their fingertips. They were able to get that information out there. The IT VP said he was desperate to find a solution that would put the reports in the hands of the people, the business people who had the information. Just a quick slide here from Gartner. You'll see customers do end up rating our software very, very high in terms of usability and total product score. And this is important. I'm just going to spend a moment on this because the product score tells you what the product can do. So you need a product that can really span a lot of different areas, whether it's ad hoc analysis, reporting, dashboarding, et cetera. And you need a product that is easy to use. And you're never going to get to that self-service goal and that true collaboration if the product isn't easy to use. Because, again, you're going to be in this situation where IT has to iterate on every report. So with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do a demo right now and show you how this collaboration between IT and the business can work. So what you should see right now is Tableau Server. This is our server product. There are a number of published views here. And I'm actually going to go into our desktop authoring product. This is Tableau Desktop, and this is the environment where I would go and start to ask questions, maybe create a report that I want to share with other people. And I'm going to connect to data, and I'm actually going to connect back to that Tableau server that we just saw. And I'm already logged in, so I'm going to go get some county health data. So this is one important way that IT and the business can collaborate. IT has put this information out on the server. They've scrubbed the fields. They've maybe done some ETL to the data, and they've put it out there for everyone to use. So instead of having to go and find this data or scrape it myself, I can go and get a published data source from IT. And so now we're in the Tableau Desktop environment. I've connected to the data source on the server. You can see that listed up here, and you can see some dimensions and some measures here on the left. And perhaps I'm doing some health insurance analysis, and I want to understand different demographics across different areas. The first thing I'm going to do is look at a map of different data, and I can see I've got some geographic fields here. I can see the globe, and simply by double-clicking on state, I can get a map of where we have data. And what I might want to do is go ahead and look at the % of people who have graduated high school across the U.S. And I'm going to go ahead and customize this a little bit to make it pop where there are low and high graduation rates. And I'm just going to go ahead and fix the ends of the axes here. And so in a couple of minutes, you can see immediately where we have some high school graduation rates that are above and below normal. And that might be something that I'm interested in as a policy analyst or an insurance analyst, saying, okay, well, where are there potentially some at-risk populations? And clearly I have a hypothesis in my mind about what kind of effect this will have on healthcare. So I've done a simple analysis here. And again, simply by double-clicking on county here, I can add that to my analysis. You'll see, let me back up a step to show you that again. You'll see I double-clicked on county, or I could just drag it into the view, and my map went from a state-level view to a county-level view. And authoring in Tableau is just that easy. So now we've had IT give me a data source, and now I'm some kind of a user, probably a power user type, and I'm creating a report here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new sheet, and I'm going to just start to explore the data a little bit. And perhaps I'm not sure what's really in the data, and I want to look at all the states and counties in my data. Perhaps I want to see the number of people who are smoking or in poor health. And again, I'm just dragging and dropping here. I've created a bar chart. I may want to just swap these over so that my bar chart is ordered a little bit differently. I can change my aggregation from a sum to an average. And these are some basic analytical tasks, so I can start to see what's going on across my data set. And we'll drill into the different data in a minute. And again, I'm going to take the graduated high school, and I'm going to go ahead and give it the same color range that we gave it before, so that you can see how these relate. We'll go up to from 40% to 1% to 100%. And so this kind of drag and drop authoring makes it very easy to find some outliers here. So for example, Nome in Alaska has a very low graduation rate and does seem to have a lot of people in poor health and a high rate of smoking as well. So I'm going to do another common analytical task. I'm simply going to duplicate this sheet, and I'm going to look at it in a different way. I'm just going to do some dragging and dropping here, and I'm going to look at perhaps a scatter plot of all the counties in my data set. And you can see that we've got some null data on both sides, which is very common, and we've got some kind of a correlation here. Won't call it causality, but some kind of a correlation between poor health and smoking. And that's not that unusual. I might expect that. But now we're going to get to one of those really hard burrs that happens in business intelligence a lot. I'm sitting here doing this analysis, and I'm using this great data set that's been provided by IT, but perhaps I have some data on healthcare spend by county. What are different governments actually spending on healthcare, and what is the correlation between that and some of these metrics? And I've got that sitting on my desktop, and I'd really like to blend that in. Now, I could go to IT and ask them to build me a data warehouse and blend these together, and that would take weeks or perhaps months, and of course it would be quite expensive. What business users want to be able to do is simply go and connect to data. So let's just go connect to data, reach out to that Excel workbook, and here's my healthcare spend by county, and I'm going to choose the 2011 sheet and choose to connect live, and you'll see that just show up in my data. So now I've got two data sources here, and you can see that Tableau has actually noticed that county exists in both my data sources. This is my original IT provisioned data set, and this is my my data set on my desktop. And Tableau said, hey, you've got county in both sets. We're going to just establish a relationship there. And now I can simply come out and I can say, well, instead of looking at the number of smokers, perhaps I want to look at the healthcare spend. And so now you can see healthcare spend on the x-axis and the percent in poor health on the y-axis. And I've actually blended data from my secondary data source, my spreadsheet from my desktop, with data from the IT provisioned data source in Tableau server. And so that's kind of data blending is something that business users want to do all the time, and they can't necessarily do. Now I'm simply going to go ahead and create a dashboard. I'm going to size it to a standard laptop, and I'm going to drag and drop, just like I dragged and dropped to create each individual analysis. I'm going to drag and drop to create a dashboard that relates them all. And I'll just do a little bit of cleanup here to make it more readable. And now this is useful, but it's at a little bit too high of a scale. I've got the county level and the whole U.S. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a quick filter on state, and I'm going to make that state, change that affordance a little bit and make it global. And now I can click into a different state, and I can see, for example, across California what graduation rates look like. And I can go and I can see what the trend in California looks like for that healthcare spend and average and poor health. And it looks like, for example, I've got LA County here as an outlier with a lot of healthcare spend. That's not surprising, it being such a large county. We've got another one, Kings County here, and I can also go through all of the all of the data here and sort on different measures. So what I've done is a very powerful analytic technique. I've actually linked up the views, linked up data from different views and even data from different data sources here in my scatter plot. And I can go ahead and add another filter. Perhaps I'm really just interested in graduation rates. That's my primary filter, and I'm going to go ahead and make this one global too. And now I can look at only counties with very high graduation rates, or I can look at counties with the lowest graduation rates, and that's very useful as well. So now I've got this nice rich analysis, and I could spend some time doing a little bit more exploration with the data and trying to find interesting correlations, but I've got something that I think is useful. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and publish this workbook up to Tableau Server. And I'll go ahead and put it in the default, and I'll call it Health by County. And I'm just going to publish the dashboard. And so once I publish this to Tableau Server, this is a server that's running just locally on my machine. It could be a server in the firewall somewhere or what have you. But this server happens to be on my machine. Once I publish this up to Tableau Server, what I get is an interactive browser window with the data here. And I can go ahead and open that right on Tableau Server. And if I'm in this dashboard, then I can send a link to somebody, or I can embed it in a SharePoint portal. I could leave a comment on this. Looks like LA spends a lot, and somebody would come and find that comment here when they view the dashboard. I could share that and just simply email it to someone. If I email this to a colleague, they don't need any kind of downloads or plugins to see it. They don't need Flash. They can simply view it in a browser window. I can embed it, and I can even go and look at some different states. And share that out as well. So I've gone from a data source published up by IT, blended that with some data on my desktop, and published this out for a lot of colleagues to see. And so the business user is answering questions and using their expertise to go and answer some of these questions. IT is provisioning data and a server, making sure all the security and the governance are set up within this environment so that IT and business can work really well to use some of that data that's existing in the enterprise but maybe isn't getting used as well as it could. So that's the demo, and Eric, I'll turn it back to the slides if that's okay.
All right. Yeah, just go ahead. And actually, I can just take over and hand it over to Wayne. Oh, there we go. So Wayne, I'm going to hand the keys of the car over to you. And actually, if you just click the tab, actually, let me take it back real quick. And I'll click this tab. And folks, feel free to send those questions in at any time. So, oh, there you go. So Wayne, there is your first slide. And let me give you the keys to the WebEx. You should have it now. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah, it's me, a little bit elongated. Skinnier, though. Okay. Tableau's got a conference coming up. I was there last year. It was a great event. I'm going to talk, I have two slides on self-service BI. Since Ellie mentioned self-service BI, I thought I'd present my perspective on it. I've been talking about self-service BI for 12 plus years, and I think we're finally getting to the point where it's almost possible. Although it was interesting on our webcast yesterday that the irony about self-service is that users still need a lot of hand-holding if they're going to be able to do it. It's kind of counterintuitive, but you need to provide support and some training and one-on-one time with some of these power users before they feel comfortable developing their own reports. Of course, there's a large span of power users out there, for sure. And some will adopt it right off the bat, and others will take some time. Okay, so the problem with self-service I've seen over years is that there's actually two types of self-service BI. There's one type of self-service for consumers of information, and there's another type of self-service for producers of information. So as you can see here, there's also hierarchy for these two self-service types of self-service. So if we start with the consumer hierarchy, you can see that as you move down this list here, the functions listed become more interactive, and by being more interactive, they become more analytical. So as users or consumers of information start to exercise these sets of functions, they become more self-service enabled from an interactive perspective. So viewing is simply just viewing a static report. We did that all the time in the print world. We still do that today with PDF-based reports. Navigate simply means you're going to drill down, if needed, on predefined drill paths, usually by clicking and getting more detail, sometimes by clicking on some predefined filters or parameters. So navigation, in this sense, is providing guardrails for users to protect them from getting lost in the data and tangled up in their information underwear, so to speak. The next level down, modify, is where users can actually take a look at a piece of data and say, you know, I really would like to see it a slightly different way. You know, I want a subtotal here, so let's create a new column and do an average or a count or a sum. Or let's do, you know, create a custom grouping, or let's rank or sort, or create a new filter. So that's what I call modifying, taking an existing view and then changing it to meet your specific needs. So that's obviously a little bit more sophisticated, more interactive, more analytical. Exploring is the next step, and that's obviously what Tableau supports. Let's connect to a data source that IT's prepared, and then take a look at what, you know, look at the metrics and the attributes or dimensions in that data set, and then pick the ones we want, and then display them, and maybe pick another data set, as Ellie just demonstrated, and combine it, if possible, with the first data set. So that's kind of exploration. It's ad hoc. The data sources aren't necessarily defined in advance, but they are available in advance. And finally, the last is modeling. There's actually two types of modeling. Ellie showed the simpler type, which is what-if modeling. Very common now with visualization tools to have a slider that changes one parameter and automatically updates another field or view of data. That's what-if modeling. And then the other is analytical modeling. That's a whole different level of modeling that requires statistical or machine learning knowledge. That's a whole craft, as it were. So right in the middle here is this little diamond that says Expose on Demand. And the best BI tools that I've seen out there don't give users all this functionality at once. They understand that some users really don't want all that functionality. Some just want to view. Others want to navigate, so on and so forth. So they have controls that enable administrators to define the level of functionality by role. And they also know that users, as they use tools, become more fluent with the technology and the functionality, so they can expose more functionality over time as users feel comfortable with the tool and need and want more functionality to get more benefit out of the data. Now, on the producer side, as we traverse this hierarchy, we can begin to do more complex development and do more IT-oriented types of tasks that typically have been done with ETL tools and coding and scripting. So at the first level, producers, people who produce information for others to consume, can personalize the screen, change the colors, the backgrounds, the fonts, and maybe set some of the cascading style sheets at a more sophisticated level. The next level down is to assemble. And this really means to assemble largely dashboards from predefined report parts, which are tables or charts or controls that are in some kind of online visual library that users can drag and drop these components onto a dashboard canvas and create a dashboard from basically from reports that have already been written and run. And I call those types of dashboards that are assembled like that mashboards, because you're really mashing together things that have already been defined and produced. The next level of sophistication and development really is crafting, and by that I mean crafting a report or a dashboard from a semantic layer. And most BI tools, at least the more traditional tools, have these metadata layers where they define back-end database objects in terms that business users understand. That's what a semantic layer is. So you can create your own queries and then assemble the results of those queries into a report or a dashboard. That's what crafting is. Now, sourcing means to go out and source a whole new set of data. And typically this requires a lot of time in a data warehousing environment. And it may also involve a lot of time in a BI environment and may be impossible depending on how complex the source system is. If it's a data mart or even a data warehouse, it's probably not too hard. If it's, you know, an ERP system with 2,200 tables that are arcanely named, it's going to be tough to do that kind of sourcing in a BI tool. And then finally, develop simply means writing code or script to create a custom application or data flow. So my last slide is basically overlaying those two hierarchies with casual users and power users. There's a slight difference between consumers, producers, and casual users and power users. So consumers, as I said, consume information. Producers produce it. Now, casual users are people who use information to do their jobs. They're not paid to crunch information. Those are power users. So casual users are executives, managers, frontline workers, so on and so forth. And typically, you know, executives, they may only view information. Managers may be a little more adventurous. They may view and navigate, and some even may view, navigate, and modify. But typically that's where casual users, at least this generation of casual users, stops on the consumer side, is at the modify level of self-service. Now on the producer side, some casual users may personalize their interface. And I'm being a little bit aggressive here in saying that some may even assemble and craft, but largely not. That's why self-service has failed in the past, is that BI vendors have given casual users self-service tools designed for producers, and it just hasn't worked out. So self-service on the consumer side makes sense, but for casual users, not so much on the producer side. Now, power users, on the other hand, they are business analysts, they're statisticians, they're data scientists, super users, and they play both roles. They consume data as well as produce it. In fact, oftentimes they produce it so they can consume it, and then they share what they consumed with the casual users. So they'll traverse the entire consumer hierarchy for sure. And I'm being a little aggressive here on the producer side too. I think I was trying to be symmetrical or something. But power users, you know, typically those business analysts and super users are business people who kind of gravitate to the BI tool when it's deployed and kind of like to use it and become the go-to guy in each department for creating ad hoc reports. Whereas a business analyst is really hired to, you know, crunch numbers, create plans for executives and things like that. They oftentimes are one person in the same company. But power users typically will do assembly, crafting, and occasionally some sourcing, as Ellie showed in her demo. Not too much developing. If they do any developing, it's scripting. I think I have a build here. Oh, I don't have a build. But typically you'll see the BI developers doing all the sourcing, most of the sourcing and all of the developing, custom coding. So that's my perspective on self-service, kind of honed after a dozen years of thinking about this and seeing how users interact with the tools. There's more to it than this, believe it or not, but I think I'll stop there since I probably exceeded my time. And now, Eric, I'm supposed to grill Ellie, right? With questions?
That's exactly right, so go for it.
All right, I will go for it. So here are my questions for you, Ellie. And I think you kind of answered most of these as we went along, but it certainly wouldn't hurt to reinforce them. You know, self-service, like any highly used or overly used term in our industry or any industry, kind of gets used and abused. Everyone applies their own definition to it. So what is Tableau's definition of self-service?
That's a good question, Wayne. And yes, self-service definitely gets overused. At Tableau, what we say is we want to help people see and understand their data. And so what it means to us is that any business user should be able to reach out and work with their own data, provided they have credentials to see it and security and so on. And when you take that down a level from the 30,000-foot view, what that means to us is that anybody should be able to reach out and work with data that they're familiar with and that they have questions about, and not need to be in your parlance, a superpower user, a heavy producer. So yes, we do see this kind of stratification in almost every enterprise of there are the producers, the superpower users, even the super consumers. But anybody should be able to go and just work with data. Now that might be on a published dashboard where they do nothing but click a couple of links and interact with the data. But they should be able to go a level deeper and maybe change a column out or add some more information to the view in some way or another. And the way that really breaks down, as I just alluded to, is it's whether or not you need special skills or programming. And at Tableau, we think you shouldn't need to learn how to program to work with your data. We think it's a very broad skill that is needed by almost every professional out there. And it's like using a word processor. You shouldn't need somebody to go and use a word processor for you to type your documents. You ought to be able to just go and type some thoughts, and the same with data. You don't necessarily have to create the most beautiful dashboards ever. Everybody doesn't have to be the producer that's sending dashboards out to the whole organization, but everybody should be able to go and interact with their data at some level. That's how we see it.
Yeah, and I'd have to say that this new breed of visual discovery tools does, especially Tableau, because it's not just in memory, it can connect directly to data sources. It does a really nice job of kind of bridging these two worlds here, because you make it pretty easy for a producer to, a power user to produce something, sourcing and then crafting, a view for themselves, and then being able to analyze that view. It's kind of the first time we've seen that done in a tool, and then turn around and publish it to consumers who can consume it at a much lighter level, view, navigating, and modifying. So I really like these visual discovery tools, and that's why they're so popular, is that they kind of service two roles. They allow people to do the analysis, which is more bottom-up intelligence, as I call it, and then produce the reports and dashboards for everyone else, which is top-down. And few tools have figured out how to bridge that gulf. It's not perfect, and that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, what setup does IT need to do to implement self-service? Now, you talked about this, and one of the gripes I have with a lot of BI, with all BI vendors really, is that they make it seem so easy. And
yeah.
In a perfect world with the perfect data, it is easy, but most companies, unless you're sourcing from a really well-designed data mart or your own Excel spreadsheets that you've, massaged and cared for and curated properly, it's ugly. I mean, data is just nasty, mean, brutish stuff. And
yeah.
And
it doesn't behave.
There's no tool in the world that is going to help you easily, our power user, kind of sort that out, cut that Gordian knot. So, I guess maybe I want to stretch you a little bit here and say, all right, what if you guys are running directly against a complex ERP system? With, as I said, 2,200 tables that are difficult to for a business analyst to know what they even mean. Is that even possible, or would you recommend that's where IT gets involved and they really need to build some kind of a data warehouse or data mart or at least a data extract for you to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely, when you start talking about ERP systems of that scale, you definitely want IT involved at some level. I mean, we see you can buy Tableau Server and provision it for 10 users and have, no IT involved and just have people publishing data sources and reports, and that works for a small work group. But when you do get to the bigger implementations, anything, anything with multiple groups and tens of people even, the role of IT in what you brought up, Wayne, I mean, what I would hope they'd be able to do for the user is make available some data, and whether it's in a data warehouse or connecting directly to the ERP system, that's IT's decision on which is more appropriate. But make available to the user some data that is useful to them. So as a user, I don't want to have to go and do ETL on all my ERP data. I'm just not going to do it. I don't want to have to load my ERP data into a data warehouse or figure out how to connect to my ERP data if there's not a native connector in my BI tool. And so the role of IT is to get that data into a place that's meaningful for the user, and that might include some ETL. It might include naming tables and naming fields in a way that a user could just read, and they don't have to go and look up some complex data dictionary. So there are those things, and helping the user understand what of that is meaningful. And that's where I really see IT coming in. IT is in a way building the walls of the house, and the user should be able to go and walk around into different rooms of the house and make themselves a sandwich and turn on the television and do things like that. So you do need those walls of the house. And the reality is, even when IT has gone and made a data source available, there will always be dirty data. And so the business user needs to be able to handle that too. Because if you say that the business user will never see any dirty data, the business user will never see any data. So the business user needs to be able to say, okay, that data is clearly an outlier. There's something wrong with that. I'm going to exclude that. I'm going to focus my investigation over here where I can tell the data is more robust. So that's how I see the interplay between them.
Well, that's good. I appreciate your candor there because I do find that IT needs to be involved, and a lot of companies are using these, new visualization tools, Tableau, ClickTech, and others to, in some cases, circumvent IT because they're too slow and too expensive, and that's legitimate gripe. And they bring these tools in, and they're happy as clams, and then, after a month, a couple months, maybe a year or two, they hit the wall. Things not performing, it's not scaling, the data's not right, and they come back to IT. So I think organizations that understand that there needs to be a balance between IT and these departmental or individual analyst solutions up front do a lot better because they can point these to, the data that IT or the BI team has generated so far. You're taking a huge step ahead, and you can make IT happy, and as you said, a lot of IT people like these tools as long as they're being pointed to the, to the corporate data sources that have been cleansed and integrated. And when the data doesn't exist in those systems, that's when you can bring in your own, and that would make sense to do so. Now, you guys have been talking about how good you are for big data. And because you're not just in the memory tool, you have your own, VizQL language. You can go connect to any data source. But when it comes to unstructured data in, like, say, Hadoop, how does that work with you guys? I assume you have to go through a Hive interface, and it looks like SQL to Tableau, and someone's cleaned up that data, at least the view of it in Hive, so that it can be downloaded or queried directly from Tableau.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. To work with Hadoop, for unstructured data, we do go through Hive. You need to use Hive. And where we see customers using Hadoop and getting value from it on the unstructured side is, clearly you just use HDFS as a data dump, and you just put everything in there. You don't attach a schema to it until you create a schema in Hive. And so we see customers using Hadoop in many cases to have a flexible schema to try things out. And so there is that additional step of using Hive to create a schema, maybe exploring that, maybe going back and adding some more into Hive. So at the end of the day, it is structured data to Tableau because it's gone through this SQL-like interface, but the power is the flexibility. And in some cases, and this is definitely depending on the user, in some cases it's the user themselves able to go and change those Hive tables to pull different data out of the file structure. And so that's how we see Hadoop being used with Tableau today.
Great. All right, now I want to kind of help the audience and myself understand how you guys are similar to or different than other visual discovery tools in the market. Personally, I think you're actually very different than most of the other ones because you have that direct connect capability. And you started off as a desktop tool that now has some server components to it. Whereas, say, a QlikView, which is a very popular tool out there. I mean, that to me, it's a very different tool. You're more of an exploration tool that can connect the data source, explore that data source, do a little blending between multiple sources as you demoed. But a QlikView, because it's all in memory, it's more of a development environment for building dashboards, not as much an exploration tool. It's really a consumer tool entirely. If you look at my self-service hierarchy, they're completely on that left side, whereas you guys kind of span both. You're a power user tool that can do some development, some producing, whereas on the QlikView side, you need IT to produce those most of the time to produce those QlikView dashboards or a QlikView partner to do it, which is basically surrogate IT. So I'm wondering if you agree with that assessment, that they're more of a development environment for creating these departmental and increasingly enterprise dashboards, not as much an exploration tool, except for casual users. They can get pretty far down that hierarchy. Whereas you're a lot different than that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, in QlikView, and it's a powerful tool. A lot of people love it. You do need to do some scripting to, for example, connect to a data source and pull in your data, to create a group, to describe things. You go through kind of a wizard interface to describe the charts. So there's this, as I think you were saying, there's a hard line. You are either a programmer, scripter, developer type, or you are someone who is using the interactive published report. Whereas in Tableau, you see people playing both of those roles. And some people are only ever consumers and only ever interact with the published reports, and that's fine. But I mean, I think the scripting is one way that we're different. And another way that we're different is the way that we interact with data. So we really think of Tableau as Switzerland. We like to sit in the middle of all the different data sources and connect to them. So we'll connect to data marts and databases like Oracle and SQL and Hadoop and Excel and whatever it is, we'll connect to it. And we're adding data connections all the time. So, we've got MapR in beta now, and we added Hadoop recently. And so we're always adding new data sources. Basically, if the customer is using something, we want to be able to connect to it. And so we kind of look at things like that, like Switzerland, and then we say, okay, well then it's your choice in memory or not in memory. QlikView has taken a different approach, and they have you pull all your data in memory and load that up in memory in their proprietary data format. And so, some people really like that. Some IT departments don't like that because it creates a data silo, and you're kind of investing in duplicate infrastructure in some ways. So I think our philosophy in terms of not only who's a producer and a consumer is much more fluid, but our philosophy about what data you can work with and how you can work with it is much more fluid. We like to just let the customer do what they do.
Right. So QlikView really is creating these data marts, essentially. They're in-memory data marts. They get refreshed usually every night. And that's not what you are. Now, you do have this new in-memory capability, where people can download a data set to their desktop, store it there, and run it in memory when they want to run it. And it's great for disconnected use as well. So it's a more of a desktop database, but now you've also moved that, I believe, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, you've moved that to the server. So I'd like to know if that is giving you more of a data marting capability by doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. We in our 7.0 release, we let you publish data sources to the server. So what that means is that you can now be in memory on Tableau server. And I would say, philosophically, it's the same thing as on the desktop. You may publish a data extract to Tableau server of your transactional database, so that basically what you've created is a little analytical data mart on Tableau server. So you're taking advantage of Tableau server's processing power and our proprietary kind of in-memory architecture that's optimized for query, so that you can take some of that analytical load off your transactional database. And then by publishing it to server rather than leaving it on somebody's desktop, you've simply made that data source available to all of your users. You can also
but I
publish.
think there's one difference. There's one difference with. I mean, it's not, as I understand it, and I could be wrong here. It's not a pure data set like a QVD file in QlikView, for instance. That data set has the embedded metadata, or the metrics.
It does.
The attributes that whoever produced it, associated and attached with it. So it's not raw. It's not raw data in a data mart form. It's already got this structure to it, which could be good or bad. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the way that we advise customers to use that is it's really a way to manage your metadata. So if you do publish the data and you've added some calculations or definitions or what have you to that data, then that's all published together. So for example, everyone in your organization, if they hit the same data source on Tableau server, can be working with the same definition of profit, however you define that. But it's important to note actually that a published data source can actually be a pass-through connection as well as the data. So that means that the data can either live in memory on Tableau server, or you can simply publish that metadata model, as you were saying, Wayne, the definitions, the descriptions, et cetera. You can publish that metadata model and the connector information so that it is connecting to a back-end database. And what that means is that your users don't need the drivers, for example, to connect to your SQL database or Vertica or what have you. They simply connect to Tableau server, and as long as Tableau server has that set of drivers, your users never need to install those. And your users also get all that metadata. And you may never have actually duplicated the data in an extract on Tableau server, but to the user it's transparent. It's up to IT or whoever publishes that data source, whether you're attaching the data to it or you're making a pass-through connection.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. So you guys are kind of creeping your way towards the semantic layer. Obviously at this point you could have multiple versions. You could have multiple types of these. I don't know what you call them up there, data mart, meta marts or whatever. That may not always be consistent and aligned, but theoretically IT could create one big data set and or a series of linked data sets, and voila, you have your semantic layer that everyone can use to access a variety of data sources.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that make sense from your perspective? Is that what you're doing or heading, or is that not really how?
Exactly. No, I mean we heard this from customers. They wanted to manage the data sources that customers were connecting to, and again, it doesn't exclude them going out and reaching out for data on their desktop or data in another database. But they say, hey, everyone's using our student information data or our ERP data or whatever, and we want to publish that connection, again, with or without the actual data. We want to publish that connection. We want to attach some semantics to it, some metadata, and make that available to people much more easily than it was before.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I should mention that I was talking about QlikView, but there are other tools of that ilk. Spotfire is one, and Advisor Solution, and a lot of the main BI players, MicroStrategy and Cognos, have similar types of tools. One question for you is, so you guys kind of play both sides of that self-service spectrum. Do you find that your customers in general are using it as an analysis tool to explore, or as an easy-to-use dashboard creation tool? Or is it hard to tell because they're doing a mix of both?
It's really a mix of both. I mean, there are groups that use Tableau as a in a more traditional way as a BI tool, i.e. they're people who are report builders and analysts, you know, the classic producer, and they are acting as a service center for the rest of the organization, publishing out standard dashboards and KPI reports and whatnot. And they're just using Tableau to do it because it's you know, they find it to be an easier creation environment and a good way to manage that content. So that's kind of the very traditional dashboard scenario. And then you have people who are using it, you know, for ad hoc analysis on a daily basis, publishing ad hoc reports about a specific project instead of an actual, you know, what we would consider a monthly dashboard or a tracking dashboard. And then you have people who do both. And when I talk to customers, I hear the full gamut. People use it, you know, in all of those different ways.
Yeah. All right. So I could ask a bunch of more questions that are a little bit more nitty gritty. So Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you because I see that we've got some questions from the audience, I believe.
Yes, we do, and we have some great questions. We have some really good comments too. I'm going to throw one out, and Ellie, I'm actually going to pass the keys over to you, just in case you can. Just in case you can demonstrate how some of this stuff works. But some of the questions are around the guardrails, frankly. Some of the questions are around how you make sure that users aren't misusing data. So one of the attendees had this great comment. He referred to it as the patina of. Let me get it right here. Oh, it's going to take me a minute.
Patina?
Yeah, the patina. There you go. I'm even pronouncing it incorrectly, but the classic patina that if the chart looks good, the data must be right. I have to say, I think that's funny. But can you show us like the metadata layer? Can you give us some guidance through if you could review your demo?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me share my screen again. So the metadata layer in Tableau is defined in the workbook itself. So here we are in Tableau Desktop. And let's just go, and this is the published data source, if you'll remember, county health data. Mm-hmm. And a couple of things are already defined in this, but I could do something like, for example, I could just, you know, a simple change to metadata would just be to rename a field. Another change might be to change the default aggregation for something. So I've right-clicked on %smokers, and I'm just going to change, or I change the data type to a string, for example, or change it to a date or a time. So those are some things that you might want to do, a very common thing that you might want to do in the metadata layer. Another thing that you could do is if one of these measures were an index, we know that they're measures, but you know, pretend that %uninsured is some kind of a unique ID. And I'll just call it that, and we know this will be bad data, but let's just pretend. Let's just call this a unique ID. It's already a number, but I'm going to go ahead and make it a dimension so that Tableau knows that this is actually describing the data. It shouldn't be a continuous field. And I can do things like change the number format to make something always a percentage with a certain number of decimal places. So now I've done a fair number of things. And what I can do is I can actually just go ahead to the server and I can publish the data source. Let's do it here. Hold on a second. Actually, I think I have to republish here. Sorry, I haven't. Well, I can add to the saved data sources, but I can also, hold on a second, I can just publish it up. Publish the workbook here, but I can also publish the data source. Let me go ahead and click out of that. I'm sorry,
that's quite all right. That's good. It's a good granular view of
how
you do things.
I'll find it in a second. But you can republish the data source basically, and then when somebody goes and connects to that data source, what they'll see is they'll see this unique ID up here when I go and create a new workbook off of this data source. And then I'm going to get, you know, all of the different formatting that I put with it, or this new name. It's all going to come down with the workbook and with the data when somebody connects to it.
Okay,
now, Ellie, you've got two data sources up there, and what a lot of, certainly ETL tools do, but you even showed a little bit of it, And QuickView and some other tools have this ability to link tables. They kind of give you a table view.
Yeah.
But I don't think you guys have that, but you do something called blending. So how do you create a view that, or a semantic layer that combines data from multiple sources, which you're kind of doing here?
Yeah, you can do that. We do actually have the concept of joins if your table's within the same data source. So if I have an Oracle database with multiple tables, I can join among those tables as I want. In this case, we have created a blend, and that is actually preserved in the data source. The blend, if I publish this workbook and somebody downloads the workbook, they'll download it with the data already blended. And I can even publish that blended data as a data source. But I can go ahead.
The blending really is just that little link icon that we see there.
Yeah, and the way it happens is Tableau found a field in common, in this case county. And you can, what I'm doing here is I'm editing that, so I could say, well, you found county in common, but maybe I wanted to do something else. Maybe I actually wanted to link on another thing, for example, state. So Tableau will guess at what the relationship is between these two data sources just based on the fields that are in play, but you can always go and edit that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's some interesting functionality because, as you suggest, sometimes there is a match, but maybe you don't want to look at it that way. You don't want to be constrained too much.
Right.
We have a couple. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the join is the same way. Tableau will often try and find a join on a unique ID or something, but you can always go in and edit that join.
Okay, good.
And I guess the other big thing here is we've had analytical tools for a while in BI. They were called OLAP tools, and they do dimensional analysis. There's no inherent sense of dimensions in these visual discovery tools, although I know that you can create them, right?
What do you mean by a sense of dimensions?
Creating a
like a hierarchy?
Hierarchy within a dimension and then aggregating up the hierarchy.
Yeah, you can. In fact, the hierarchy is part of our metadata. So in this case, this is a hierarchy on state and county that was published with the data source and came down with the data source here. And so this is the kind of thing where you can create a custom hierarchy with your dimensions. And in fact, you can just kind of click around and create that on the fly. So that's part of the metadata.
And what about, one of the attendees is wondering, what about importing an existing semantic layer or ontology or something like that? How easy would it be to take an existing construct like that and bring it into, to manage your metadata here in Tableau?
It depends on exactly what you're trying to bring in. If you've got the metadata defined as part of the data source in some cases, we can just bring that in. So that's really, it just depends on the data source that you're working with. And if that person gets in touch with me, we can talk about what data sources in particular they're working with.
I see. Okay. Okay, we have a bunch of really, really good questions. One of the attendees, I really like this one, writes, the challenge I have with both Tableau and Spotfire is that you get very little reuse of components, meaning if I need to take a chart from one dashboard and all its formatting and use it somewhere else, there's no mechanism for automatically doing that. Is that correct?
There is. We do have a concept called bookmarks, so you can bookmark a workbook and then find that bookmark, and you'll take a lot of the formatting into your new workbook.
I see.
So we have a lot of customers who use that functionality.
Okay, good. All right. Let's see. We have another person, or very specific question, I should say. This is interesting. One of the attendees writes, what will happen to the notion of single version of the truth for this self-service model? How can you make sure that standardized and enterprise-level definitions are not violated?
That's where publishing the data source comes in. I mean, that's a great question, and that's one of the reasons we do let you publish a data source. So if you have, for example, your CRM data, and you want to do some transformation to it, you want to add some calculations, some special things, you would go ahead and publish that as a data source and only let people connect to that published data source. So they're getting the single version of the truth that you have defined for the entire organization. And when you do that, then you're really able, that's what I call building the walls of the house. You kind of define the parameters by which people can operate, and they can go in and do some analysis against that data source. And they can create new calculations and things. But again, for example, if you if you define profit to be a certain calculation for the entire organization, nobody's going to be able to go in and change that definition. They can create something called my profit or profit 2 or profit 200, but they can't change profit. So you always know that if you see profit in a view, that's always the same definition.
Okay, good. And here's another good question, and I can kind of expand on it a bit. One of the attendees wants to know if you want to use tools like this to visualize and report from a copy of an ERP database, what challenges might you face? And I'd be curious to know, how real-time can some of this stuff be for your visualizations, realistically speaking? I mean, can you incorporate, change data capture and the sort of variety of ways of pulling data in?
Yeah, ERP data is a really good question. Let me answer the real-time thing first. You can connect, a live connection in Tableau is a real-time connection, and you may not want that. That's one of the reasons that we do have people use extracts. A live connection can put a lot of analytical workload on an ERP system or database. And so you may want, you really need to look at how often do people need to refresh the data. And again, this is something IT is often very good at. You may want to schedule your data to update every night at midnight or every hour or whatever it is that's important to you, but you may not actually want to be hitting, especially something like an ERP database live. And then in terms of connecting to ERP, we actually just announced a connector to SAP BW. We're working on HANA now, which we hope to release in a few months. But working with ERP data, it's a really important source of data for the enterprise, and it's one that a lot of people want to work with. So we've added that connection in, and we're trying to make it easier to connect the ERP data no matter what system it's in.
Okay, good. And we got a couple more good questions here, and then I'll actually throw up. In fact, I want to throw up right now a slide from yesterday. Wayne had this very interesting new concept that he's promoting, the analytical maturity model. I'll show that in 1 second. Here's a really good question or comment / question. One of the attendees writes, without a strong and mature MDM environment, master data management, self-service comes with some risks. Users need to recreate derived calculations time and again, and this can be risky. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go back. Our answer to that is the published data source. And with the published data source goes metadata. And part of metadata is calculations. And so shared definitions, shared calculations are a really big part of a published data source. And that's where you can do some of your master data management. And then, of course, another aspect of master data management is cleaning the data in a certain way, making sure everybody's gotten to the same end point with a data set. And that I see as the role of IT, get the data set in the right shape, create the right definitions, the right calculations, and then publish that up for the users to make use of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ellie, one point of clarification here from Wayne is, so you said earlier if you create in your server-based data set a definition that no one else can publish that same definition, is that within that same data set? I mean, someone's free to create another data set, publish it to the server, which would have the identical metric name, for instance, but defined differently.
Yeah, it depends on what permissions you've given your users. Yes, users, I could, for example, pull down a data source, do a bunch of work to it, and then publish it as a new data source. And that would be, Ellie's data source or what have you. And so, yeah, as a user, you have the flexibility to continue doing all the work that you were doing. But if IT has gone out there and said, look, this is our data source about our CRM data or ERP data, whatever it is, and they've locked that down and said nobody can publish over it, this is the canonical data source, then that's just going to stay out there. You can even say that users aren't able to publish any other data sources if you really want to lock it down.
Yeah. So, I mean, it all comes back down to governance. And the thing that terrifies IT or the BI team, which is not always in IT these days, about these powerful new tools is that, I mean, they're like bazookas. You can use them to, to win the war or to create chaos.
Yep.
So it all comes down to having strong governance, data governance, BI governance, report governance. So these tools can be your best friend or your worst enemy from that perspective. Yep.
But I think if you yes, there's work for IT to do, and there's work for business users to do to work well in that paradigm, to follow the rules. But if you say that these could be a bazooka or they could be a problem, then effectively what you're saying is we're not going to give our business users access to data. And that's when you start, really cutting people off from the ability to make better decisions.
Yeah, right. Hey, we've got one more good question I'll throw at you, and then we'll wrap it up. We've gone a bit over time, but all these great questions, folks, and I just love that some of those comments, especially the patent comment, that was classic. Let me ask you about security. Can you talk about how the different levels at which you can apply security and how that works, and can you tie into existing security infrastructure, for example? LDAP, I guess, is what some people use, but how does that work?
Yeah, sure. So in Tableau, there are several levels of security. There's security in Tableau Server itself, and there's database security. And so when I publish, taking the Tableau security to begin with, when I publish a dashboard, I can choose users or groups of users that can or cannot see it. And then there's also database security. So logging into Tableau Server is not the same as logging into a database. So if a user has no credentials to data in a database, they won't be able to see it in a Tableau Server either. So what that means is I publish a dashboard about, Central, West, and East sales, and if the Western sales manager only has credentials to see Western sales, she may only be able to see Western sales, and the Central sales manager can only see Central sales, because you're actually going back to the database and authenticating against the credentials in that database through Tableau Server. And so there are these several layers of security. So they need to have access to the dashboard in Tableau Server, and they need to have access to the back-end data as well.
Okay, good. And one attendee asked about SharePoint, too. Can you talk about maybe the different ways that you guys can interface with SharePoint and use SharePoint?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of our customers use Tableau with SharePoint. It's as simple as just going and getting that embed code that I showed, which is right up here, taking this embed code and putting it in a SharePoint widget, and then you've got a live interactive view right in SharePoint. Again, you need the credentials to get to the SharePoint, and you need the credentials to get into Tableau Server. There are some ways that we can open it up for the whole organization, but basically it's a simple cut and paste. If you've ever cut and pasted a YouTube video into a web page, it's very similar to that.
Okay, good. And folks, I put up Wayne's new analytical data and data maturity model, which I find rather interesting. So we had a webcast yesterday. You can see a link to it in the chat area of your browser right now. And with that, we will thank you for all of your time and attention, folks. Great briefing room today, once again, with Wayne Eckerson and our friends over at Tableau. So we'll look to catch up with you the week after next. In fact, we're taking next week off, and hopefully so are you. We will archive this at InsideAnalysis.com, so hop online anytime to check out any of the 55 past briefing rooms that we've done. They're all very interesting, and they're all there for you free of charge. So with that, we're going to bid you farewell, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.